All right, well, we're all here, and it's right on time. We got the recording to finally work. We have Dr. Walter Block with us on the actual Anarchy in Action, and this episode or recording can be found at actualanarchy.com/Walter Block. That's up on the screen there where everyone can see, and we have Dr. Block with us here. So thanks for joining us. I really do appreciate you coming on to talk about the most recent article that you wrote regarding the LP, the Libertarian Party. There's been a lot of controversy surrounding the Libertarian Party, the chairman, and some of his antics lately. And there also seems to be a conflation in media lately that is trying to tie libertarianism with white supremacy and Nazism and other terrible, slanderous things that are not true. And so I appreciate you taking the time to come and join us here.
My pleasure to be with you.
So my friend Robert is my co-host, so he's with me as well. And like I said, this can be found at actualanarchy.com/Walter Block. And why don't we just do a brief introduction in case anyone doesn't know who you are. Your 30-second elevator pitch, Walter.
I'm Walter Block. I'm a longtime libertarian. I was a friend of Murray Rothbard. My claim to fame is I once shook the hand of Ludwig von Mises, and I never washed my hand since. And the hand's a little dirty, but, you know, if you shake my hand, you channel Mises. And I got a PhD in economics from Columbia in '72, and I've been a long-time libertarian and Austrian Economist.
Very concise. Thank you very much. Now, I have also shook your hand.
Uh-oh.
And so, by transference, I suppose I get some Mises, some Rothbard, and all the rest of the fine folks at the Institute there.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's a picture of me and you. Just
Good.
to give my anarchist cred here. And
two pretty faces.
Now, Walter, my first question, while I'm just trying to pull up my interview questions, you are a full-blown Rothbardian anarcho-capitalist, right? Like,
absolutely, yes.
And it's a very principled position. I think it's the logical conclusion based on a lot of thought and introspection. And so I guess a lot of our conversation is going to be centered on how does that square with the party versus principle and voting in general, the political process. And as I've emailed with you, Ron Paul is, of course, accepted, and so I have a logical thing I haven't overcome because I'm okay with where I'm at because Ron Paul did what he did. I wouldn't be here today without him.
Well, I think it's true. For my generation, the person I think who deserves the most credit for converting more people to free market libertarianism than anyone else is Ayn Rand. For your generation, a younger generation, I think that credit goes to Ron Paul. So thank God for Saint Ron Paul. He was magnificent. Dr. No, I wrote a book about him, my love letter to him. Let me show it on the screen. Here is I don't know if you can see it, but this is my book, The Ron Paul Revolution, and it's a compilation of articles I wrote over the years supporting his various activities, so I'm a big, big fan of his. I don't see any inconsistency or contradiction between Rothbardian anarcho-capitalism on the one hand and voting for Ron Paul. I mean, it seems to me the two go together, love and marriage, horse and carriage, and voting for Ron Paul, if I could make it up as I go. The example I use is suppose we were all slaves on the plantation, and there were two overseers, Overseer Goody and Overseer Batty. And each overseer would beat the crap out of us, but Overseer Goody would do it once a month, and Overseer Batty would do it every day, twice a day. And now the owner of the slaves, us, said, well, you can vote for Overseer Goody or Overseer Batty. And we all voted for Overseer Goody. Well, that violates libertarian principle? I don't see it. And voting for Ron Paul or voting for Gary Johnson and Bill Weld in the most recent election, I don't see that that's per se an initiation of violence. And the only thing that is prescribed by Rothbardian libertarianism is the initiation of violence against somebody's person or legitimately owned property. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with the Libertarian Party or with the Republican Party, that is the Ron Paul part of it, or even Rand Paul. He's no Ron Paul, but he's pretty good. He's probably the most libertarian senator we've ever had in the history of the country. So I'm not one of these don't vote folk. So then the question comes, well, should we support the Libertarian Party? And Murray Rothbard used to say that the average guy over 4 years, what is he interested in? Is he interested in fishing or bowling or hunting or, I don't know, chess maybe, and pizza and beer, and then every 4 years for a couple of months he's interested in politics. Otherwise he couldn't be less interested. And Murray used to say, well, we want to spread the libertarian message not only to academics and intellectuals, but we want to spread it to the common average guy, average person. And one way to do this is the Libertarian Party. And Murray was very, very active in the Libertarian Party at its inception. I was involved in the Libertarian Party before it even started as a national group. It started nationally in '72. In '69, I ran for New York State Assembly. My motto was, we have to have disassembly. So I'm a long-time fan of the Libertarian Party. I think it's a wonderful vehicle, not a perfect vehicle, but a wonderful vehicle. And our duty, our obligation, moral obligation, not requirement, is to spread liberty. And this is one way to spread liberty, so I'm a big fan of the LP.
All right, so that's a good answer. Robert, do you have a question in response to that, or do you want me to jump in?
Well, I'd like to kind of break apart all those things that Walter was just talking about. I mean, this is really a strategy session, right? I mean, we're all on the same page. We're all freedom lovers. And this is really just about the best way to get our message out there, or the most effective way to get our message out there. And, I mean, Walter, you're talking to a guy that is a non-voter and believes to be a principled non-voter. I do see voting as the initiation of force, because the end result of your vote is not optional. So even if you go into it with the best of intentions, you don't control the outcome. If the result of your vote was optional, I'd be all for it. I mean, people getting together and voting for what to have for dinner tonight, that's perfectly fine. But if I'm going to vote for, say, baddie A or goodie A or goodie B, it sure seems like I'm supporting one of the two and voting and supporting the system that at its very heart is coercing me every minute of every day. So I would say to withdraw my support from that.
Well, I don't like what you said from you're too utilitarian for me. What you said, if I can put words in your mouth, I think I got the gist of it, is that if something has bad effects, then you shouldn't do it, and it's contrary to libertarianism. Well, I write a book, and I do the best I can, or I give a speech, I do the best I can, and somebody might misconceive it and do something bad. Or I make a movie. Let's say I'm a movie producer and I make a movie, and somebody sees the movie and goes out and does something bad because he's inspired by my movie. Not my fault. It doesn't mean that I'm not a libertarian. Look, take the Bible. The Bible has got all sorts of stuff about God gave this group to that group, and this guy killed that guy, and there was rape. So suppose somebody reads the Bible and now goes out and rapes or kills. Well, are you going to say that the Bible is contrary to libertarianism? I don't think so.
So, you're saying that when a politician gives a speech and claims that he's not going to do X, and you vote for that politician based on that statement, when he goes around and when you give him this power, and then he doesn't do X, he does Y instead, you don't share any of the blame for that?
Well, I don't really think you share the blame. It's sort of like, suppose a criminal comes up to you with a a gun that says, "Give me your money or I'll blast you." And you give him money, and now what he does, you know what he does with that money? He goes out and buys another bigger gun, and now he robs other people, even better because you helped him. Well, I would say you're not acting contrary to libertarianism by giving him your money. You were under duress. Therefore, you're blameless. You voted for the lesser of two evils, and it's true, the lesser of two evils is evil. But, you know, suppose, getting back to my slave example, the master said, right now, overseer Batty, who beats the crap out of all of us slaves every day, every hour, he's the man. But if you want to vote, you can vote for Overseer Goody, and you only get a beating once a month. And you're going to sit there with your hands under your buttocks and not vote. And if you were the only one voting, we'd all be beaten viciously every hour. So, you know, I don't see that as virtuous to sit on our hands and not vote for Overseer Goody, who will only beat us once a month.
But Walter, why would you play their game at all? Playing their game at all gives legitimacy and gives him the air of legitimacy to beat you at all.
Look, you pay your taxes, you're giving him legitimacy. You walk on public streets, you're giving him legitimacy. You use currency, U.S. fiat currency, you're giving him legitimacy. You go to a museum or, I don't know, there are, you know, the only way, according to your logic, to not give them legitimacy is to commit suicide or maybe become a hermit and live in the woods somewhere and hunt for squirrels. No, look, I'm teaching at a public university, not right now, I used to. I'm giving them legitimacy? No, I'm undermining them. So according to your logic, if you cooperate with the government in any way, whether it's voting or walking on a public street, you're giving them legitimacy? So,
well, wait a minute, though. You're conflating two things. You're conflating one thing that is, I have no choice in doing. I've got to walk on the roads. There are no private roads that I can use.
You don't have to walk on the roads. You can commit suicide. You don't have to walk on the roads. Stay off those roads, boy.
Isn't suicide against the law as well?
Well, I'm not sure. I think it might be. I don't know. But you don't have to walk on the roads. You don't have to use government currency. You don't have to pay your taxes. You don't have to do anything. Go be a hermit or commit suicide. Libertarianism is not a suicide pact.
All right, Daniel, let's get to some of your questions, or do you have some more things to say about that?
No, that's pretty compelling. My critique of the Goody versus Batty is, in my understanding of it, you're basing it on campaign promises, which 9 times out of 10 are lies. And so knowing what is the better of the two evils is really hard to say because you don't know what their future actions are going to be. And I guess then it just becomes down to preference, right? Like people are going to line up on, well, I happen to like this person a little bit more for some, you know, aesthetic. And I don't really know if that's an effective strategy. I mean, I'll backtrack and say that, you know, Ron Paul, he used it as a vehicle for education and marketing and building up, you know, new followers and new people to the idea, and so I laud that. I mean, I'm a product of it. But Gary Bake the Cake Johnson and Bill Weld versus Crooked Hillary, or what do they call Trump, the Orange Cheeto, you have no good option, right? And you can't believe any of the things they're telling you.
Well, I think we had a good option. First of all, I thought Hillary was horrible. And I thought Donald wasn't so bad. Donald said some good things. It's true he reneged, but in the election of 2016, he said things like, I can get along with Putin. He said, look, we went into Libya, we got rid of Gaddafi, and now look, it's a mess. We went into Iraq, and we got rid of Saddam Hussein, and now it's a mess. And now you want to go into some other countries? Not on my watch. He said some very, very good things. Whereas Hillary was saying, you know, we got to have a war with Russia, for God's sakes. So I started 2 groups along with colleagues. One was Libertarians for Trump, and the other was Scholars for Trump. And Libertarians for Trump, we got, I don't know, about 4,000 or 5,000 people signing up. And Scholars for Trump, I started that because they kept saying, well, the only people that are going to vote for Donald are redneck idiots. And, you know, I started Scholars for Trump, and you had to have a PhD or an MD or a law degree or something, and we got about 150 signatories for that. So I think that Donald is way better than Hillary. I wake up every morning and I am deliriously happy Hillary is not president. She would have been, she wanted to have a war with Russia, for God's sakes. I mean, that's imbecilic. So my strategy, and I agree with you two guys, we're all Rothbardians here. We don't disagree on the principle, the non-aggression and property rights based on homesteading. We're just talking strategy. I wanted Donald rather than Hillary because I thought Donald was overseer goody and Hillary was overseer baddie. So my policy was, if you're in a clear red state or a clear blue state, vote for Gary Johnson. On the other hand, if you're in a purple state where it could go either way, well, then vote for Donald. And that way we sort of have our cake and eat it. We can get Donald vis-a-vis Hillary, and we can get some publicity for libertarianism. Now, look, Gary Johnson was not a perfect libertarian. Bill Weld was not a libertarian at all. I mean, he might have had one bone in his body that was libertarian, but I think we have like several hundred bones in our body, and only one of his bones was libertarian. So he wasn't a libertarian. But Gary Johnson was a vaguely libertarian, you know, maybe 60 out of 100 or something like that. And if we could get publicity for the LP, we could put liberty on the map. My goal was that Gary Johnson and Bill Weld would get more votes than the difference between Hillary and Donald. It didn't work out, but that was my goal. And I did everything I could to help Gary Johnson. I'm a sort of a personal buddy of his. I like him personally, even though he's not as libertarian as I'd like. And look, if we got more votes for the LP than the difference between the two major parties, we would put liberty on the map. Look, we don't have Ron Paul anymore in Congress, and we do have Rand Paul. My big dispute with Ron Paul is I wish he was still in the Congress. I think he would do more for liberty as a congressman than in his present activities. But look, he's a big boy, and he has to promote liberty the way he sees fit. But we don't have him. We almost had him in 2012. You know, there were like 15 people running for the Republican thing, and the last two standing were Romney and Ron Paul. And if Romney had somehow got caught with his hand in the cookie jar, Ron Paul could have run on the Republican, and he might have beaten Barack Obama. And if he did, all the troops would be home the next day. And I wouldn't say we'd have nirvana because there'd be a Congress that would try to impeach him like they're trying to impeach Donald. But this would have been magnificent. This would have been gargantuan. We didn't make it, but, you know, we have to try. So I make no apologies for supporting the LP as a matter of tactics. I want to put liberty on the map. Look, you know, I approach this in a different way than you guys. I'm 76. You guys are, I don't know, in your 20s or something like that. I've been in this movement a long time. I was in it. I started in 62, probably before you guys were born. And when I first got involved in it, they never mentioned liberty. The word liberty never appeared in the New York Times or the Washington Post or NBC, ABC, CBS, whatever. And the word libertarian never appeared. It would be confused with librarianism or libertinism or something like that. And now, happily, mainly because of Ayn Rand and Ron Paul, even the New York Times mentions libertarianism. They don't get it right. What the heck? You can't expect everything. But we are doing so much better now than we were in terms of getting publicity for liberty. And I think the Libertarian Party gets a small part of the credit. Ron Paul, a much bigger part. But Ron Paul also ran on the Libertarian Party ticket. I forget in what year. And he got the usual 1% or 0.75%. So I make no apologies for supporting the LP.
All right, so that's a good segue into your article. I've got it listed on the background here, and there's a link to it down below. And we've read through it, and you want to just give a real quick summary of your main point of the argument, and then we'll get into some of the challenges that we see and some of the people that have submitted questions to us see with this strategy.
Well, it's a nice picture of me. Aren't I pretty? I'm kidding. I just, you know, It's just sort of what I was saying now, that the LP is an imperfect vehicle, but a vehicle in promoting liberty. It doesn't do it perfectly, but it promotes liberty, and I'm supporting it. And there are always people who are attacking the Libertarian Party, and I'm trying to promote them. I say, quoting from there, the Johnson-Weld team hit an unprecedented 3%. The highest previous percentage of votes from the Libertarian Party was around 1%. So this was triple. It's true, it should have been better. It should have been 5%. It should have been 10%. They would have done better had they been allowed to debate with Donald and Hillary. They weren't. But, you know, 3% is unprecedented, and it's too bad that it wasn't the difference between the two in any state or anything like that. But still, the article is sort of, yay, Libertarian Party, and I stand behind it.
Yeah, so one of my critiques of that was that you could have rolled out Bernie from Weekend at Bernie's and gotten more than Gary Johnson did, just on the name recognition.
No, say that again. I didn't hear you. I didn't fully understand what you just said. What about Bernie?
So, Weekend at Bernie's, the old movie.
Oh, I thought you were talking about Bernie Sanders.
Well, yeah, I'm saying that Weekend at Bernie's, because the guy's name is Bernie, he could have gotten more than Gary Johnson. It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek kind of joke thing, but.
No, I hear you. Look, if I were running or you were running, we probably would have got 3%. Probably we would have done better than Gary because we're principled Rothbardian libertarians. So we might have got 3.5%. By the way, speaking of Bernie Sanders, I don't know if you know her or not, but he and I went to high school together. And we were on the same track team together, and we were sort of friends because we lived in the same quadrant away from Madison High School, so we'd walk to school or back home sometimes, and we were sort of acquaintances. And I used to have his views, but thank God for Ayn Rand, so to speak. She converted me out of Bernie Sandersism toward Rothbardianism.
So, wait a minute. Has Bernie been held the same views his entire life then?
Yeah, Bernie is consistent. I'm inconsistent. Bernie has upheld his views consistently. I've changed. I think you're right that if I or you or Robert were running for the president in 2016, we might have done better than Gary. We might have got 4%. Who knows? But, you know, Gary won the convention, the LP convention, and he... I'm sort of, I don't know why he picked Bill Weld. Well, I guess he picked him because he's more famous than somebody else, but Bill Weld was not a libertarian, and that was sort of a disgrace. I mean, Bob Barr, the LP has got a record of not picking very good presidential candidates. Bob Barr was worse than Gary Johnson. Bob Barr was horrible. Bob Barr was once asked at the convention, what was it, would you legalize drugs? Which is sort of a litmus test, and he said, well, it's not a national issue, it's a local issue. So then somebody said, well, if you were running for governor, would you, or mayor, would you then favor legalization of marijuana? And he said, well, that's too hypothetical for me. I mean, this guy's a Republican. He's not a libertarian. So I'm not saying that everything that the LP ever did was good. The LP is a disgrace in many ways, but they're our LP. I remember one time Bill Buckley said of somebody, sure, he's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. Well, sure, the LP is a son of a bitch, but it's our son of a bitch. What else do we have? Well, we do have the Liberty Caucus of the Republican Party. There ought to be another Liberty Caucus in the Democratic Party. There isn't, but what the heck. So we have other vehicles. And we have many, many other vehicles to promote liberty other than political. I mean, the Mises Institute, I'm a big fan of theirs. I'm a big fan of Loyola University, where I teach, because I've got good colleagues. And there are many, many other institutions and periodicals that promote liberty, but we're sort of focusing on the political. And from the political point of view, I think the Libertarian Party is a good vehicle.
Yeah, and going back to your comments about Ron Paul in 2012 being the last man standing with Romney, you're right. I mean, it's almost like buying a lottery ticket, right? The chances are slim, but it's a chance. You're telling me there's a chance.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
All right. Well, about our son of a bitch being the LP, let's segue into this next portion of the questioning, and that is the LP chair conflating the Mises Institute, Woods, Rockwell, Murphy, etc., as marketing to Nazis and white supremacists. And that is, it's a black eye on the LP, as far as I'm concerned. And I did ask you, pre-show, if maybe he's a evil genius just trying to rally people against him to get them to spur to action and join the LP to unseat him and create controversy to get additional eyeballs. But it's a pretty nasty and libelous and slanderous way to go about it.
I agree. If he's an evil genius and this is his way of promoting liberty, I take my hat off to him. But I have no evidence for that, so I have to resort to reality, and the reality is, just taking him at his word, he's criticizing Bob Murphy and Tom Woods and Lou Rockwell and Jeff Dice and other people associated with the Mises Institute. And as far as I'm concerned, the Mises Institute doesn't walk on water. The Mises Institute doesn't skip on water. The Mises Institute runs on water. I mean, the Mises Institute is the last best hope for liberty. I am an uncompromising supporter of the Mises Institute. And to have a guy criticize the Mises Institute in any way, well, I don't want to go that far. I mean, I might have some minor differences with some of these people, but to have them seriously criticize the Mises Institute is very bad. And to say that they're Nazis, I mean, what's that? I mean, that's way over the top. So I think Sarwark ought to go. I think that there is a Mises caucus in the LP now that's trying to kick him out, and I support the Mises caucus of the Libertarian Party. Sarwark is preposterous, except if he's an evil genius, in which case, I take my hat off to him. But apart from that, I think he's serious. I think he's saying that somehow Tom Woods is a problematic libertarian. I mean, that's crazy. Tom Woods is one of the most gifted libertarians on the planet.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And my theory on Sarwark is not one that I believe in. I'm just throwing it out there as a 1 in a million, like the lottery ticket. And now you did mention the Mises Caucus. I am involved with that just very, very loosely. I'm in their Facebook group, and they just crossed over 1,000 members. And I don't know if you're familiar, but one of the reasons that they were formulated was not only because of the Sarwark business, but also some of the other nasty things have been coming out against the Institute, but also the Libertarian Socialist Caucus, which is trying to take the reins of the Libertarian Party. And so this leads me into a question of, and yeah, I know, it doesn't make sense, right? Libertarian and socialist, it doesn't go together, but they're saying that rent is theft and all of those things. So they're not libertarian in really any respect.
Well, we could have a Libertarian Socialist Caucus because voluntary socialism is okay. I mean, if you define socialism as government ownership of the means of production, well, then there's a chasm between us libertarians and them who are socialists that is infinitely wide. Mm-hmm. But if you define socialism as from each according to his ability to each according to his need, which is an alternative definition of socialism or Marxism, well, we libertarians can adopt that. I mean, as long as it's voluntary. For
right,
example,
yeah, you can't impose it.
You can't impose it, but it's voluntary. Like, say, the kibbutz or the commune. If they want to live like that, God bless them. Let them live like that. I don't think it's economically efficient, but it might work in a small group of 10 people. And also, the average family, mother, father, and 3-year-old girl. The 3-year-old girl eats not in accordance with her ability to earn income, but in accordance with her need. So, we can sort of make common cause with libertarian socialists if we define socialism in that way. Certainly not in the other way. I wanted to mention another criticism of the LP, and that not of the LP, of Mises, and that's this guy Stephen Horowitz. Yes. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's in this Bleeding Heart Libertarians, and
yeah, he was on the Jeff Dice speech, the end of that speech with the Blood and Soil comment.
Right. He also is a critic of Mises, and I think he's made contributions to libertarianism and to Austrian economics, although that's a little unrelated, or not exactly related. But he just doesn't understand libertarianism. Libertarianism is the theory of when is violence justified. And we libertarians think that the only time violence is justified is in defense or in retaliation, and that's it. Whereas he's what's called a thick libertarian, and thick libertarians have the view that you have to not be a hater, you have to not be an anti-Semite, you have to not be a racist, whatever. Look, suppose that somebody, call him Joe, and he hates everybody. He's an equal opportunity hater. He hates Jews, he hates blacks, he hates gays, he hates bald people, he hates people with hair on the top of their head, he hates people that wear a blue shirt, he hates people that wear a pink shirt. He just hates everybody. But he doesn't initiate any violence against anyone. Now, should we put him in jail? Well, according to the Horowitz understanding of libertarianism, yes, we should put him in jail, because libertarianism, the theory of when is violence justified, says that if you hate, then you go to jail. Well, that's crazy. This poor guy, Joe, let him hate. As long as he doesn't lift one finger against anyone in violence, we libertarians have no problem with him, because libertarianism is a very narrow philosophy, and it only concerns one question, namely, what is the proper use of violence? And it only gives one answer: in retaliation or defense against the prior use of unjustified violence. But this guy, Joe, the mass hater, he hates everyone. He didn't initiate any violence, and yet, according to Horowitz, if I understand him correctly, he would put Joe in jail, but he would use violence against Joe, in effect, but that would be unjustified. Let him hate. Who cares? Let them wear white uniforms or black uniforms or whatever they want. As long as they keep their mitts to themselves, we libertarians have no problem with them qua libertarian. Now, we have problem with them as ordinary citizens and decent people, but that's a different issue. That's not qua libertarian.
Well, well said. Well said. I just moved the slide over to share the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus and some comments that were in the Tom Woods group, where even if you don't like the Libertarian Party per se, it's important to be involved and take it back from the people who are using it for ill. And I think that that's a decent message. I think it coincides with a lot of what you've been telling us so far today.
Well, it says I do not like the Libertarian Party. I like the Libertarian Party, but I just want to get rid of Sorwark and Horowitz and other people who don't understand libertarianism or who attack libertarianism and misconstrue it and publicize it erroneously. They should not be our spokesman. So I like the LP. You know what it's sort of like? I have a friend who's a staunch Catholic. And this was during the era when they discovered that Catholics were molesting small boys, Jesuits, and other Catholic priests. And I asked him about it. He said, look, I'm still a Catholic. It's just that the people involved, some of the people involved in Catholicism are evil, and we got to get rid of them. Well, I see the same thing. Not that I'm equating misconstruing libertarianism with, what do you call it, preying on little kids. Child abuse, but it's the same principle, namely, he likes the Catholic Church, I like the Libertarian Party. Yes, sir. Certain Catholics engage in child abuse, certain libertarians misconstrue and publicize libertarianism in an erroneous way. You don't get rid of the Catholic Church, the Catholics, and you don't get rid of the Libertarian Party for us libertarians who believe in it as a good vehicle.
All right, well, thank you for that. Robert, any other questions before we get into questions from the various groups that we've shared the interview with, or told them we were going to have an interview with Walter here?
Well, Walter, do you see, I mean, as you spread the message of liberty, do you see there becoming a tipping point where we eventually just kind of walk away from the whole political process, or do you see it as this eternal battle that you're constantly having to fight other people for this ring of power?
Well, you know, the political process is only one avenue toward liberty. I personally am not that involved in the political process. I am a professor of economics, and I publicize, I give speeches, I write, I teach students. I'm very happy that maybe a dozen of my former students are now professors of economics and hopefully converting their students to liberty and good economics. There are many, many other ways. You know, one of the, somebody once wrote a thing, why does the left have all the good folk songs? Well, you know, if somebody would create a good folk song for libertarianism, I would applaud him. Ayn Rand went through novels. She was a fiction writer, a magnificent fiction writer. Atlas Shrugged is the best novel ever written as far as I'm concerned. And that's another vehicle toward liberty. So I'm not saying that politics is the only one. There are many, many ways to Rome or to Jerusalem or wherever we're going or toward liberty. And politics is just one of them. So I'm not saying everyone should do politics. Robert, you're not a political kind of person. Fine. Go do something else, as you are now doing. You are now the host of this magnificent blog or show or whatever it is. And that's great. And if somebody could come up with a song or another novel or a movie or a comic book or anything else or a newspaper or I don't know, a magazine to promote liberty, that's fine. So I'm not saying we should all be political, and you know, probably 5% of my effort is political. The rest is more intellectual. I'm more trying to, I don't know, attack Milton Friedman for not being a libertarian or James Buchanan or whatever, or my old teacher Gary Becker. I think I can make more of a contribution in that way. So in my own case, I do very little politically, that is political party. I'll give speeches to the LT National Convention or the state conventions. I think I've given maybe to half the states that have had state conventions. I've given speeches there. So I do want to contribute politically, but personally, it's a small part of my output.
Yeah, I'm with you entirely. Politics is one way to get the message out. You're right. I see all the social justice warriors and the Marxists coming out of the universities, and it sure seems like that's an opportunity that freedom lovers could use to change it around. I mean, if they can be taken over by the Marxists, then they can be taken over by people who love freedom. Not necessarily, maybe not complete just state institutions, but there are a number of educational tools that we've put forth, and we can continue doing that.
I wanted to mention a few other groups. There's the Institute for Justice that sues governments when they won't let people do air braiding. There's the YAL, Young Americans for Liberty. There are other groups like that. I am the faculty advisor for the Libertarian Club at Loyola University. So there are many, many ways to promote liberty, and politics is just one way. It's an important way every 4 years or every 2 years, but other than that, it's not that important.
You know, Walter, I got to tell you, between you and Adam Kokesh, you might have me swayed here.
Swayed about what?
Well, I had the thought that voting was violence, but Kokesh got me to see that voting, the act itself, is not a violence thing per se. It's like firing a bullet out of a gun. It depends on what you're pointing it at.
It seems very reasonable to me. When Adam Kokesh came to New Orleans, he had a little seminar. I was one of the speakers. I'm a big fan of his. I think he's great. He's very courageous. Usually libertarians try to not really hide their anarchy, but not put it front and center. He's the anarchist candidate for the LP, so I applaud his courage. If I ran for president, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't run away from anarchism any more than Bernie Sanders ran away from socialism, but I wouldn't place it front and center. So I applaud him for being very courageous, and I wish him the best of luck in getting the nomination for 2020.
Yeah, well, thank you. We had him on for our show number 30, which was a 4th of July special about Idiocracy, that movie. So that's at actualanarchy.com/30. And we wear the Anarchy on our sleeve, of course. You can see it in our URL. And our contribution is trying to tackle some of the cultural aspects. So we analyze movies from a Rothbardian and Anarcho-capitalist perspective. We view it as a vehicle to get our foot in the door with a lot of people who might be familiar with a movie, and we can slide in some of the theory and some of the ideas and concepts regarding Austrian economics and libertarianism, non-aggression principle, etc., in our conversations. So that's our contribution. I don't know if we do it that well. I thank you for the ringing endorsement already. And if we can, should we move into some questions? We've got about 15, 20 minutes left here from the hour you said you'd share with us.
Sure. Shoot, so to speak.
It is Hans Hoppy's birthday today, so it's very apropos.
Hans Hoppy's birthday. Well, Hans is another preeminent libertarian who is heavily associated with the Mises Institute, and I'm a big fan of Hans. I consider myself a good friend of his. Happy birthday, Hans.
So to speak. All right, so I got a couple of questions here. Mike C. asks, the problem is that the primary people driving people to leave the LP just so happen to be the leadership of the LP. We need the LP to stop attacking libertarians. We need well-read people of intelligence, honesty, and integrity at the head of the LP, and sadly at the moment we don't have that. What type of qualities should an LP chairman have? Walter Block.
Well, I'm not against attacking libertarians. We're not a cult. We're allowed to attack each other. The Ayn Rand cult or the objectivism, you couldn't attack each other. We can attack each other. I disagree with Murray Rothbard on some things. I disagree with, I don't know, Mises on some things. I disagree with Ron Paul on some things. There's nothing wrong with attacking libertarians. But when you attack Lou Rockwell or Bob Murphy or Tom Woods as Nazis, I mean, you know, that's grotesque. So I agree with the questioner. I think we ought to get rid of this guy. What's his name again?
Sarwark.
Sarwark. Right? I think we ought to get rid of him. He's a disgrace. But not because he attacks libertarians, because he does it in a crazy, unjustified way. Look. Ron Paul and Murray Rothbard disagree with each other on abortion. Murray was pro-choice. Ron is pro-life. I have a different view. My view is evictionism. So I attack both of them on this issue of abortion. That's okay. Nothing wrong with criticizing other libertarians. We're not as I say, we're not a cult. But what Sarwark does is just unforgivable and ridiculous. To say that Tom Woods is a Nazi, I mean, it's sort of like the New York Times saying that I favor slavery. It's just abominable, and we ought to get rid of him and cleanse the stables, the swamp of the LP, and get some decent people in there. Again, there's nothing wrong with attacking libertarians, but what Sarwark did is unforgivable.
All right, thank you for that. There are some questions related to your support for Trump. If I recall correctly, you did not actually vote for him. Is that right?
I'm too lazy to vote. I never. The last time I voted was for Gary Goldwater in '64. I'm just lazy. I mean, I'm well, not that lazy. I do write a lot and I do speak a lot, and you know, I'd rather than spending a half a day voting, I'd rather write in another article. So I didn't vote for Donald, but I certainly supported my man Donald.
Okay, so Joe M. and Joey D. ask, how's that support for Trump working out for you? And I do have your correspondence with Bob Wenzel, and I can link that below if you think that summarizes your current position.
Sure. Well, the answer to how is it working out for me, not that well. He's going back on a lot of things, and he's sticking to the things that he's bad on, like he's very bad on free trade, and he's sticking to tariffs and protectionism. But on Afghanistan, I thought he'd pull out all the troops. Instead, he's putting more troops in. What the hell are we doing in Afghanistan? What did the Afghanis ever do to us? I mean, the function of the president is to safeguard the country. No Afghani ever attacked us. Not Malcolm X. What's his name? Muhammad Ali once said of the Vietnamese during the Vietnam War, no Vietnamese ever called me the N-word. The point was, no Vietnamese ever attacked us. What the hell are we doing there? Well, no Afghani ever attacked us. What are we doing there? If you have to attack someone, maybe the Saudi Arabians. I'm not advocating this because 9/11 was, I think, 15 out of the 19 was Saudis. Not that I favor attacking Saudi Arabia. Please don't misinterpret me as saying that. Although the New York Times will probably quote me as war with Saudi Arabia. But what can I do? But how is it working out for me? Not too well. On the other hand, he's not Hillary. Thank God he's not Hillary. Can you imagine if Hillary was here? I mean, you talked about political correctness on campus. Well, who supports that? I mean, Hillary supports that. She's a cultural Marxist. She's horrible. So, you know, give Donald Trump a C minus, or maybe a D plus. Hillary would have got an F minus.
All right. Well, good enough of an answer for me. I appreciate that. One of your quotes, I believe, from the article is, and this is a question from Brody R. Always keep in mind the non-aggression principle and private property rights based on homesteading and legitimate voluntary title transfer. These are the bedrocks of our beloved philosophy. Let all of us become Rothbardians and Ron Paulians now. And he follows that with, what needs to happen for the LP to be Rothbardian or Ron Paulian versions of libertarianism, especially considering some members of the LP and those vying for it don't accept private property norms. They think rent is theft, capitalism is evil, and other terrible things.
Well, take Chomsky, for example. I mean, Noam Chomsky is a great linguist, and he's really, really good on foreign policy. And by the way, Bernie Sanders wasn't that bad on foreign policy. Bernie Sanders is pretty good. I favored Bernie against Hillary. Well, I guess just get rid of those libertarians. I mean, I don't know about a loyalty oath, but, you know, these people are trying to sneak in and undermine the LP, you know, the socialist libertarians who are against profit or rent or private property or some price and want price controls. I mean, there are litmus tests. One of the litmus tests is if you think we ought to have a prohibition of alcohol or marijuana, you're not a libertarian. You shouldn't be in the LP. If you think we should have a minimum wage law, you're not in the LP. And if you think we ought to make the world safe for democracy by invading every country in the world, you're not an LP member. I don't know how you get rid of people. Maybe get them to sign an agreement that the LP stands for these 10 or 20 things. And Murray Rothbard used to say every dog gets one bite. Namely, if you disagree on one thing, what the heck? I'd say every dog gets 5 bites. But if you have a list of maybe 50 things that the Libertarian Party stands for very clearly, such as you don't need a license to do a hair braiding, and Uber is okay, and we shouldn't prohibit Uber, or, you know, just very basic things like that. If you miss on more than 5 out of 100, you can't be in the LP. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. But somehow we don't want people in the LP that are against liberty.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, was there such a thing called the Rothbardian Pledge? I recall hearing about that back when our Greenbacker man, Bill Still, was trying to run for the LP party presidential nomination. Didn't get it, but he said that the Rothbardian Pledge was too restrictive and, you know, not consistent with his beliefs. Obviously, he's not a libertarian. But is the Rothbard Pledge, is that akin to what you're referring to here as a possible...
It sounds like it. I'm really not sure, and, you know, I'd have to read it again and see, but maybe something like that would work. I'm not sure, but it's certainly one of the things that we ought to have a conversation about.
Okay. Moving to, you mentioned your evictionism argument, and I noticed that you had a article on this recently posted to Lou Rockwell, so it might have additional nuance to the argument. But one of the questions I had was, so say you can evict, but you can't kill. But then who is responsible for, say, the child after it's been evicted, or the medical costs of that eviction, that early eviction, etc.? Where does that fall on the responsible parties?
You know, Murray Rothbard used to say, when people say, well, who would help the poor? And he would say there'd be a group in the Free Society called Friends of Bums. Well, you know, just charity, church, voluntary institutions like that. Well, the same thing with babies, Friends of Babies. If there's a baby, if I have a baby and I don't want to feed the baby, I have an obligation to bring the baby to an orphanage or to a hospital or to a church or a synagogue or someplace, or to the organization called Friends of Babies, and they'll take care of the baby. So we libertarians believe in private charity. Private charity is part of the free enterprise system, part of the free society, and there's no reason why all babies who are viable outside the womb wouldn't be taken up by somebody who wants to care for them.
Is that not subsidizing the behavior, though, in a way?
Well, yeah, there's a danger. You know, I just wrote an article on this movie called Poverty, Inc., and Poverty, Inc. Attacks giving private charity to places like Haiti and other places like that. Look, every voluntary action has negative implications. You have a restaurant, and I open up a restaurant right across the street from you, and I take half your customers away. Was my opening of the restaurant legitimate or illegitimate? Legitimate, of course. But I hurt you in a sense, in a convoluted sense. I took half your customers away. Or you and I are going after the same girl, and you're prettier and handsomer, and you win her affections, and you hurt me to the quick. Can I use violence against you? No. Because there was, there was no fraud, there was no force, there was no rape or anything like that. Or, take the case of charity. Yes, if we have charity for bums or charity for poor people, in a sense, it sort of encourages bumminess or povertiness. So every human action has negative implications if you trace them far enough, but as libertarians, we have to say that they are legitimate. Charity is legitimate even though it has these negative implications. Competition, whether for women or for money, is legitimate even though there are losers in the competition. So I don't really accept that argument as a critique of a charity for babies.
Okay. That's good. And there's a sub-question related to the evictionism argument, and that is from Jeff C. He asks, does Walter still hold the following position that is in his Libertarianism, Positive Obligations, and Property Abandonment Children's Rights on page 281? Quote, would it ever be possible under libertarian law for a baby to be abandoned by its parents and the baby be relegated to death? And the response was yes. Has your position on that changed at all, is the question from Jeff.
No. It's interesting. When I first met David Gordon, he would sort of quote from an article of mine, and he quoted verbatim. I don't remember exactly what I wrote. I mean, I wrote this a while back, and I write a lot of things. Only David is infinitely wise and has got a photographic memory. So I don't remember exactly that, but I stand by it. But the only case where the baby has to die is if nobody in the whole bloody world is willing to take care of the baby, which is bloody unlikely. But remember, for libertarianism, there are no positive obligations. There are only negative obligations. Now, every obligation, every right implies an obligation. If I have a right not to be murdered, you have an obligation not to murder me. If I have a right to this blue shirt, you have an obligation not to steal it from me. If I have a right to life, you have to feed me. And we libertarians don't believe in any positive rights, only negative rights. So there is no obligation in libertarians to feed babies. There is an obligation to bring the baby to the orphanage or to the hospital or the synagogue or the church, because if you don't, then you're really homesteading. You're keeping guardianship rights over something that you're really not homesteading. And I go into this with my theory of the bagel and the donut. I won't go into that now unless there are further questions on that. But the point is, I bring a baby to an orphanage or a church, and they say, well, sorry, we have too many babies. And then I advertise to the whole world through Google, hey, here's a baby. I don't want to take care of it. Anyone want to take care of the baby? And nobody in the whole world wants to take care of the baby? Well, then the baby dies. But this is unlikely. You know what it's sort of like? It's sort of like if the Martians say, and they're tough hombres, they say that unless I kill you, they blow up the whole world. Well, we're getting into science fiction here and Never Never Land. And, probably I would kill you to save the whole world, but I'd be a murderer, and I should be punished for murder. But now you're getting into these science fiction-ish, weird kind of examples. So I think that in any realistic, practical sense, all babies will be saved because we have charity. People are decent. Most people are decent. There's only 1 or 2 or 3% of the people that are criminally oriented or nasty.
Yeah, so speaking of small percentages, I did see something on Wenzel's site where you'd given a speech in the Bay Area, I believe, and you gave a percentage breakdown of the types of libertarians that exist, and I believe ANCAPs were approximately 5%. How are you sort of formulating your number here? Is it just kind of an educated guess kind of a thing?
Yeah, just educated guess. What we ought to do is get a sociologist to survey 1,000 libertarians and say, look, are you an ANCAP, anarcho-capitalist, or are you a minarchist like Ayn Rand and Rob Nozick, or are you a constitutionalist like Ron Paul, or are you a classical liberal like, I don't know, Milton Friedman or Hayek, or are you a bleeding heart libertarian, which is even a level below that because they're trying to undermine libertarianism. At least Friedman and Hayek didn't try to purposely undermine it. And then those are the 5 groups of libertarians, and see what percentage are of each. And my estimate is that most people would agree with either Ayn Rand or Ron Paul as minarchists or constitutionalists, and very few would be ANCAPs, and probably more would be classical liberals of the Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek variety.
All right. Well, I'll tell you, we're in that small minority, Robert and I, and you, Walter.
The 3 of us, yes.
Let's see. Here's a question that is a little bit out of left field, but it's from Ryan M. He says, ask him about his certainty concerning the downward sloping demand curve for labor. It is almost Labor Day, so it's, I guess, an appropriate question. Do you want to hear it again?
No, I got the, yeah, I think that it's a praxeological, now we're off libertarianism, we're on to Austrian Economics, and I think it's a praxeological thing that demand curves are downward sloping. I don't believe in the Giffen good, or the Giffen, the demand curve based on the Giffen good. The idea here is that when, on a demand curve, only 2 things are supposed to vary, price and quantity. And yet the Giffen good, something else varies, namely income. Well, you have to have a demand curve that is divorced from income changes and divorced from everything else under the sun. Prices and quantities of other goods, tastes, what have you. Now, this is a very technical thing, and I really can't do justice to it, but if you want, I will send you articles I've written about the Giffen good and about downward sloping demand curves, and you could post them and people could read it.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to do that. And one of the responses I've gotten from conversations with very utilitarian minarchists regarding this was that in a case of monopsony, the downward sloping demand curve for labor is not true. But to your point, what you just said, monopsony would not be a condition that would be a part of a downward sloping demand curve.
Well, monopsony is a little different. The monopsony argument is to try to undermine our views, and again, not as libertarians, but as Austrians, about the minimum wage law. They say if there are monopsonistic elements of the society or of the economy, then the minimum wage law can, within reason, within limits, raise wages and not create unemployment. And again, I'd need a blackboard, and I'd need a lot more than I've got now in the last 3 minutes to do justice to that. But what I will do is send you my article saying that the monopsony argument is erroneous. And the questioner can peruse that if he wants.
All right, sounds great. Robert, any final questions from you? We're down to the last couple of minutes here.
No, I just want to thank Walter for coming on. It's been enlightening, and yeah, just fantastic to hear all your views on the questions we had for you. I really don't have anything else to add.
Okay, look, it was fun, and you know, maybe in a couple months we'll do it again, and there'll be more questions. And I really enjoyed this interaction, and thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, Walter, and you mentioned you wrote an article on Poverty Inc., and that's kind of our thing, is to talk about movies from a Rothbardian Anarcho-capitalist perspective. So if we do have you back, maybe we can have you back on that format where it's just 3 guys hanging out, just chatting about a movie.
Okay, I'll send you, remind me, email me and say what you want me to send you. But Poverty Inc., I just published an article on that. So it's Poverty Inc., the Giffen good, and monopsony. And I'll post that with you, and sure, we'd have a great time. Okay, that sounds great. And as our viewers can see, this episode or this show can be found at actualanarchy.com/Walter Block. So, Walter, thank you so much for joining us. We do really appreciate it, and we wish you all the best. You're a great voice for liberty, and we're big fans. Thanks. The feeling is mutual. Thanks for having me on your show. I greatly enjoyed it. Take care, guys. All right, take care. Thanks, Walter. Bye.